Okay, picture this. You're standing on a dusty hill in Greece. Gift shop, tour bus, broken rocks baking in the sun. Looks like nothing, right? But 3,200 years ago, this was the most powerful spot in the Greek world, and the king buried here had so much gold, they covered his entire face in it. Gold death mask. That's how rich this guy was. Now picture a mostly empty field on the coast of Turkey. Nobody's there, but for 3,000 years, people have sworn that the most beautiful woman who ever lived started a 10-year war on that exact spot. A war that ended with a wooden horse and an entire city burned to the ground. Here's the wild part. Until pretty recently, that's basically all we had. Some cracked pottery, a few fading wall paintings, and the word of one blind poet whose name might not even be real. That's the entire evidence file for one of the most famous wars in human history. So let's get into it. Before Greece was even a thing, there was Crete. Around 2700 BC, this island produces a civilization that looks like nothing else on Earth. We call them the Minoans, after a legendary king, Minos, though we have no idea what they called themselves. Here's what should blow your mind. Their capital, Knossos, has 0 defensive walls. None! Instead, it's a sprawling, multi-story palace covered in frescoes of dolphins and bull leapers. They're so confident the sea will protect them that they just don't bother. And for almost 1,000 years, they're right. They build a trading empire from Egypt to Anatolia. They invent their own writing system, Linear A, which we still can't read. They have flushing toilets, plumbing that Europe won't see again for 3,000 years. The Minotaur myth? Almost certainly fake, but the palace really does have hundreds of tangled rooms. Easy to believe a monster's in there somewhere. Then, around 1600 BC, it all goes sideways. The island of Thera, modern Santorini, erupts in one of the most violent explosions in human history. Tsunamis, ash, devastation. The Minoans survive the blast itself, but they never recover. Within a couple centuries, new people move in, and these guys are not here for dolphins and bull leaping, they're here for war. While the Minoans are doing their thing on Crete, something else is brewing on mainland Greece, a completely different vibe. We call them the Mycenaeans, named after their stronghold, Mycenae. The Minoans built open, breezy palaces, beach house energy. The Mycenaeans, they build fortresses with walls made of stone so massive that later Greeks decided no human could have built them. It had to be Cyclopses, the one-eyed giants. That's not a joke. Archaeologists still call it Cyclopean masonry today. By 1450 BC, the Mycenaeans have taken Crete. They absorb Minoan culture, adapt their writing system into something new, Linear B. When archaeologists crack that code in the 1950s, it turns out to be the oldest written Greek on record. Profound secrets? Nope. Tax records, olive oil inventories, wool counts. The Mycenaeans aren't one big happy kingdom. Think rival mafia families. Mycenae, Tyrians, Pylos, Thebes. Their kings go out in spectacular style. When archaeologists crack open a shaft grave at Mycenae, they pull out a gold burial mask so jaw-dropping that the excavator announces he's staring into the face of Agamemnon himself. Spoiler? He's wrong. The mask predates the Trojan War by centuries. Bad timeline, great story. But the wealth is real. Gold cups, bronze swords, daggers engraved with lion hunts. A society obsessed with status, war, and the afterlife. Warrior elites who run their economy like a tribute-collecting machine. For 300 years, they own the Aegean. And then comes the war that will outlive every last one of their palaces. Here's the legend. It starts at a wedding. The goddess of discord doesn't get an invite, so she chucks a golden apple into the party labeled "To the Fairest." 3 goddesses start fighting over it. A mortal prince named Paris gets dragged in to judge. He picks Aphrodite. She pays him in the only currency she has, Helen, the most beautiful woman alive. Problem: Helen's already married to Menelaus, king of Sparta. When Paris sails off with her to Troy, Menelaus calls his brother Agamemnon, and together they call in every favor. Every Greek warlord who swore an oath to protect Helen's marriage. 1,000 ships, 10 years of siege. Achilles, the greatest fighter alive, gets so furious at Agamemnon he refuses to fight. Sulks in his tent. Then his best friend Patroclus dies, and Achilles snaps. He comes back, kills the Trojan champion Hector, and drags his body around the city walls. Eventually, the Greeks just cheat. Wooden horse, fake retreat, soldiers hidden inside. The Trojans drag it through their own gates. That night, soldiers climb out and burn the city to the ground. Great story, But did any of it actually happen? In the 1870s, a wealthy German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann becomes convinced this isn't myth, it's geography. He starts digging at a mound in northwestern Turkey called Hisarlik. He finds a city, actually 9 cities stacked on top of each other. One of those layers, Troy VII, got violently torched around 1180 BC, right when the legend says the war happened. Is this Helen's Troy? Probably what we're looking at is a real Bronze Age siege tangled up with 400 years of campfire embellishment, reshaped by one genius storyteller's instinct for drama. But the ancient Greeks didn't care about the difference. To them, this wasn't legend, it was history, the defining event of their heroic age. And that age was about to end, violently. Around 1200 BC, everything falls apart across the entire eastern Mediterranean at once, and historians still argue about exactly why. In roughly 50 years, nearly every major Bronze Age civilization collapses. The Hittite Empire vanishes. Egypt records attacks from mysterious raiders called the Sea Peoples, and one by one, the great Mycenaean palaces burn. Why? Take your pick. Drought, earthquakes, internal revolts, displaced populations pushing into already strained land. Realistically, it's all of it at once, a perfect storm that an interconnected Bronze Age trade network wasn't built to survive. The trade routes carrying tin and copper for bronze making just stop. No bronze, no trade, no palace bureaucracy. The whole system disintegrates. And when the palaces go, Linear B writing, which only ever existed to serve those bureaucracies, vanishes completely. Greece forgets how to write. For the next 3 to 4 centuries, Greece goes silent. Historians call this the Greek Dark Age, and the name fits. Population plummets. Some regions may lose up to 90% of their people. The great citadels sit empty and crumbling. Pottery turns plain and undecorated. Trade disappears. People scatter into small farming villages. No writing means no records. For historians, this is one of the most frustrating blackout periods in the ancient world. But something survives without needing parchment or palace scribes. It survives in memory. Bards called Iodoi travel village to village reciting massive narrative poems entirely from memory, passed performer to performer, generation to generation. Every bard reshapes the story a little, leaning on rhythmic formulas to make thousands of lines actually possible to memorize. And among those stories, the memory of a massive war fought generations earlier against a city across the sea, led by a king of Mycenae who once commanded 1,000 ships. The palaces are gone. The bronze has rusted into the dirt, but the story survives, carried by word of mouth through 4 centuries of silence, just waiting for someone to write it down. By the 8th century BC, Greece is waking back up. Trade restarts. The Greeks borrow the Phoenician alphabet and adapt it into the first written Greek we recognize today, far simpler than Linear B ever was. It's into this newly literate world that Homer shows up, and almost everything about him is debated. Ancient tradition says he's a blind poet from the Anatolian coast. Many modern scholars suspect Homer isn't even one person, more like a name attached to centuries of oral tradition that finally got written down in the 700s BC. Whoever wrote them, the Iliad and Odyssey are insane achievements. The Iliad doesn't even cover the whole Trojan War, just a few weeks near the end of year 10, almost entirely about Achilles being mad at everyone. And yet it becomes the foundation myth of an entire civilization. The Odyssey follows Odysseus' 10-year struggle home, monsters, shipwrecks, outsmarting gods, before reclaiming his kingdom. Together, those poems do something no tax record ever could. Every Greek city, no matter how much they hated each other, suddenly shares the same heroes, the same gods, the same values. One story, one identity. The world Homer describes is a mashup, half real Mycenaean memory, half the much plainer Iron Age world the poet actually lives in. History passed around campfires for 4 centuries before hitting a page. And that's exactly why it works. It's not a history book. It's a founding myth, built right when Greece was starving for a story big enough to explain itself. Once that story gets written down, it spreads fast. 776 BC, the first Olympic Games, rival city-states that would happily kill each other any other day show up to compete in the name of Zeus, the same Zeus running the show in Homer's poems. Greek colonists fan out across the Mediterranean, planting cities from Sicily to the Black Sea coast. Homer goes with them everywhere. Within a few centuries, his poems aren't just popular, they're the entire Greek school system. Philosophers quote him, playwrights steal his characters. Alexander the Great reportedly slept with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow and made a pilgrimage to Achilles' tomb. New digs at Troy and at Mycenaean sites are still changing the picture right now. The debate Schliemann started in the 1870s never really ended. And here's the part that actually gets me. The real Bronze Age civilization, the one we know only from smashed pottery, melted gold masks, and clay tablets full of tax records, never actually died. It survived its palaces burning. It survived 400 years of silence with 0 written records. It got smuggled through history inside the rhythm of a poem, recited around a fire generation after generation. A volcanic island, a fortified hilltop, a windswept mound on the Turkish coast. A world that nearly vanished without a trace, and somehow became the most influential story in the history of Western literature. Built on war, status, and gold, collapsed into darkness, and survived anyway, because somebody, somewhere, kept telling the story. Pretty crazy, right? An entire civilization, gold masks, burned cities, a war that might or might not have happened, and the only reason we know any of it is because people just kept talking. For 400 years, around fires, in the dark, with nothing written down. If this story scratched that history itch, smash like. It helps more than you'd think. Subscribe if you want more. Drop a comment and tell me where we're going next. Rome, Egypt, somewhere nobody's covered to death already. I'm listening. History lives in every grain of the hourglass. See you in the next era.